"You can't serve these types of people in the VIP section." Rachel's harsh whisper sliced through the golden candlelight of the five-star restaurant. Maya Thompson, a 28-year-old black waitress, froze in her pristine white uniform. At table 12, a scruffy man in a faded gray hoodie sat completely alone, frantically signing with his hands, while other servers walked past him like he was invisible. This was supposed to be the most exclusive dining room in the city. Designer suits, diamond earrings, $700 wine bottles, and yet here was this guy who looked like he'd wandered in from a college campus, being treated like nothing. Maya watched him struggle to communicate, her heart breaking with each ignored gesture. Little did she know, this quiet act of compassion would unleash consequences no one saw coming. The evening rush at Harrison's flagship restaurant painted shadows across polished marble floors, where the soft murmur of conversation mixed with the gentle clink of crystal glasses. Maya Thompson moved between tables with practiced grace, her white uniform pristine despite the chaos of another busy Friday night. She had learned to navigate these moments carefully, the delicate balance of being helpful without being seen, efficient without drawing attention from management. Rachel Mitchell watched from her position near the host stand, her blonde bob catching the ambient lighting as she surveyed her domain. At 42, she had climbed the restaurant hierarchy through a combination of ruthless efficiency and an unwavering belief that certain standards must be maintained. Her navy blazer was tailored to perfection, every piece of jewelry chosen to project authority. She had built her reputation on keeping order, on ensuring that the right people occupied the right spaces. The VIP section hummed with quiet conversation, where senators and tech executives shared $700 bottles of wine. Maya rarely ventured there, not by choice, but by the unspoken rules that Rachel enforced with military precision. Tonight, however, something was different. A lone figure sat at table 12, gesturing frantically at passing servers who either pretended not to notice or genuinely couldn't understand what he needed. David Harrison pulled his gray hoodie closer, the casual garment feeling increasingly out of place among the suits and evening wear surrounding him. At 45, he had specifically chosen this attire for tonight's visit, a deliberate decision to experience his restaurants as an ordinary customer might. His graying hair was unkempt from running his fingers through it in frustration, and his attempts to communicate had been met with polite confusion or outright dismissal. Maya noticed him first during her rotation past the VIP entrance. The man's hands moved in patterns she recognized immediately, not random gestures, but the structured movements of American Sign Language. Her heart quickened with understanding. She had learned ASL during her teenage years, spending countless hours practicing with her younger sister Zara, who had been born deaf. Those late-night conversations by lamplight had given her something precious, the ability to bridge worlds that others couldn't even see. But as she took a step toward the VIP section, Rachel's voice stopped her cold. "Maya." The manager's tone was silk wrapped around steel. "A word." Maya followed Rachel to the service corridor, where the polished facade gave way to utilitarian walls and harsh fluorescent lighting. Here, away from customer eyes, different rules applied. Rachel's perfectly applied makeup looked harder under the unforgiving light, her smile nowhere to be found. "I saw you looking at table 12, Rachel said, her voice barely above a whisper. "That customer has been difficult. Several servers have already tried to help him. I need you to focus on your assigned section tonight." Maya felt the familiar knot forming in her stomach, the same sensation she'd experienced countless times when watching her sister struggle to be understood in a hearing world. "He's trying to communicate in sign language, Ms. Mitchell. I could help." "The VIP section requires a certain level of presentation," Rachel interrupted, her eyes scanning Maya's uniform as if searching for flaws. "Our premium customers expect a specific standard of service. I'm sure you understand." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Maya understood perfectly, not the stated reason, but the real message beneath. She had heard variations of it throughout her life, delivered with the same practiced politeness that made direct confrontation impossible. Rachel never said explicitly that Maya's presence might make VIP customers uncomfortable, never mentioned the color of her skin, or questioned her competence directly. She didn't need to. "I understand the man is deaf, Ms. Mitchell," Maya said carefully, keeping her voice steady. "I'm fluent in ASL. I could simply take his order and—" "Maya." Rachel's voice carried a warning now. "I need you to trust my judgment on this. Return to your section. Jennifer will handle table 12. Through the corridor's service window, Maya could see Jennifer approaching the isolated customer with visible reluctance. The young server stood at a distance, speaking slowly and loudly, as if volume could bridge the communication gap. The man's shoulders sagged with each failed interaction, his hands falling to his lap in defeat. But Maya also noticed something else, the way his eyes moved across the restaurant, cataloging details with the precision of someone conducting an audit. He observed the spacing between tables, the efficiency of the service flow, the small interactions between staff and customers. His gaze lingered on the wine selection display, noting which bottles were featured most prominently. When Jennifer walked away shaking her head, he pulled out a small notebook and made a quick annotation. This wasn't the behavior of a frustrated customer. This was someone who understood restaurants from the inside out. Rachel had already returned to her station, confident that her authority had been established. Maya walked back toward her assigned tables, her hands trembling slightly with suppressed frustration. She had spent years learning to navigate spaces where her presence was merely tolerated, where her competence was constantly questioned despite her proven track record. But watching another person experience that same isolation, especially someone she could actually help, felt like a betrayal of everything her sister had taught her about advocacy. As she served bread to table 6, Maya caught sight of the man in the gray hoodie again. He had given up trying to communicate with the staff, and was now studying the restaurant's layout with renewed intensity. His notebook was filled with observations, his pen moving steadily across the pages. When he looked up, his eyes met hers across the crowded dining room. For just a moment, Maya forgot Rachel's warnings and offered a small smile. The man's expression transformed immediately, hope flickering back to life in his features. He raised his hand slightly, fingers beginning to form a sign, a simple greeting, a bridge across the void of silence that surrounded him. Maya glanced toward Rachel's position near the host stand, then back at the isolated customer. Her hands moved almost imperceptibly at her side, signing a response that only he could see. "I understand you." The man's eyes widened with surprise and gratitude, but neither of them realized that Rachel had been watching the entire exchange, her jaw tightening as she witnessed what she perceived as direct defiance of her explicit instructions. 20 minutes later, Maya felt a firm grip on her elbow as she cleared plates from table 8. Rachel's manicured nails pressed just hard enough to convey urgency without leaving marks, a technique perfected through years of managing staff with quiet authority. The manager's smile remained fixed for the benefit of nearby customers, but her eyes held a different message entirely. "Storage room. Now." Rachel's voice was honey over broken glass, sweet enough for any eavesdropping diners, but cold enough to freeze Maya's blood. The walk through the service corridor felt endless, past the industrial dishwashers and stacked linens, toward the cramped storage space where difficult conversations happened away from public view. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs as she mentally prepared for another round of carefully worded reprimands, another lesson in knowing her place within the restaurant's unspoken hierarchy. The storage room door closed with a soft click that seemed to echo in the small space. Here, surrounded by towers of napkins and cases of wine, Rachel's professional mask slipped completely. Her blonde bob framed a face hardened by years of climbing corporate ladders, each rung earned through a combination of ruthless efficiency and an intimate understanding of power dynamics. She had built her reputation on maintaining order, on ensuring that the right people stayed in the right places, and Maya's small act of rebellion represented a direct challenge to that carefully constructed world. "I gave you explicit instructions about the VIP section," Rachel began, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than shouting ever could. "And yet I watched you communicate with that customer directly against my orders. Do you think the rules don't apply to you, Maya? Do you think your personal feelings matter more than the reputation of this establishment?" The questions hung in the stale air between them, each word chosen for maximum impact, designed to make Maya question her own judgment rather than Rachel's motives. Maya forced herself to meet the manager's gaze, drawing strength from memories of her sister Zara, facing down skeptical teachers and dismissive administrators who doubted a deaf student's potential. Those battles had taught Maya that sometimes silence was complicity, that remaining quiet in the face of injustice only perpetuated the systems that kept people marginalized and voiceless. She thought of the man in the gray hoodie, sitting alone in a room full of people, his attempts at communication dismissed as inconvenient rather than deserving of basic human dignity. "He's deaf, Ms. Mitchell," Maya said, keeping her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "He was trying to order food, and no one could understand him. I know American Sign Language. I could help him feel welcome instead of isolated. Isn't that what hospitality is supposed to mean?" Her words carried the weight of personal experience, years of watching her sister navigate a world designed for hearing people, witnessing firsthand how small acts of inclusion could transform someone's entire day from frustration to joy. Rachel's laugh was sharp and bitter, like crystal shattering against marble. "Welcome, Maya. This is a business, not a charity. Our VIP customers pay premium prices because they expect a certain atmosphere, a specific level of service that maintains the exclusivity they're purchasing. That man in his ridiculous hoodie sitting there, making gestures that frankly make other guests uncomfortable, he doesn't belong in that section. And neither do you when you can't follow simple instructions." The manager stepped closer, her expensive perfume mixing with the musty scent of stored linens, creating an oppressive cloud that seemed to fill the small room. "But I could help him," Maya insisted, her voice growing stronger despite the intimidating proximity. "I could take his order, explain the menu, make sure he has the same quality experience as any other customer. How does that hurt anyone?" She thought of the countless times she had translated for Zara in restaurants, doctors' offices, and school meetings, bridging the gap between worlds with nothing more than moving hands and genuine compassion. The skill had never felt like a burden then. It had felt like a superpower, a way to bring light into someone else's darkness. Rachel's eyes narrowed to slits, her professional composure cracking to reveal something uglier beneath. "Don't be naive, Maya. You don't understand the delicate balance required to maintain our clientele. That man, whatever his situation, doesn't fit the image we've worked years to cultivate. And when you ignore my direct orders to accommodate him, you're telling our actual VIP customers that their comfort doesn't matter. You're undermining the very standards that keep this place profitable." Her voice rose slightly before she caught herself, glancing toward the door to ensure their conversation remained private. Through the storage room's small window, Maya could see into the dining room, where the man in the gray hoodie continued his solitary meal. But now she noticed something that made her pulse quicken. He wasn't just eating. He was observing everything with the focused attention of someone conducting a professional evaluation. His eyes tracked server movements, noted response times, cataloged every interaction between staff and customers. When Jennifer passed his table without making eye contact, he made another notation in his ever-present notebook. When the sommelier ignored his raised hand, another note. He was documenting every slight, every moment of dismissal, with the methodical precision of someone who understood restaurant operations from an entirely different perspective. "Ms. Mitchell," Maya said slowly, a new realization dawning. What if he's not just any customer? What if he's someone important, a food critic, or a restaurant consultant, or... She stopped herself before completing the thought, but the possibility hung in the air between them, like an unspoken warning. The man's careful observations, his detailed note-taking, his choice to dine alone during peak hours, these weren't the behaviors of a typical customer seeking a quiet meal. Rachel waved dismissively, but Maya caught the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. Don't create fantasies to justify your insubordination. Important customers don't show up dressed like they're going to a college football game. They understand presentation, respect the atmosphere we've created. That man is exactly what he appears to be, someone who doesn't belong in our VIP section. But even as she spoke, her voice carried less conviction than before, and her gaze drifted toward the window where the mysterious customer continued his silent documentation. Neither woman realized that David Harrison possessed another skill beyond business acumen and strategic thinking. He could read lips with remarkable accuracy, an ability developed during years of navigating boardrooms, where understanding unspoken conversations often meant the difference between success and failure. From his position at table 12, he had watched their entire exchange through the storage room window, understanding every word of their heated discussion about his presence and Maya's attempts to help him. What he saw in that cramped space filled him with a mixture of admiration for Maya's courage and cold fury at Rachel's casual cruelty. The dinner rush reached its crescendo at 8:30, transforming the restaurant into a symphony of controlled chaos, where every movement mattered and every mistake could ripple through the entire evening's service. Maya emerged from the storage room with her composure intact, but her spirit bruised, Rachel's warnings echoing in her mind like a persistent drumbeat of limitation and fear. The dining room buzzed with the energy of 100 conversations, the soft clink of silverware against china, creating a backdrop of manufactured elegance that masked the tension simmering beneath the surface. Rachel positioned herself at the center of the dining room, like a general surveying a battlefield, her navy blazer immaculate despite the evening's demands, her blonde bob perfectly styled, even under the pressure of managing 300 covers. She moved with predatory grace between tables, her smile never wavering as she greeted VIP customers by name, inquired about their wine selections, and ensured that every detail met her exacting standards. But her attention kept drifting back to table 12, where the man in the gray hoodie continued his methodical observation of the restaurant's operations, his notebook filled with annotations that seemed to multiply with each passing moment. Maya tried to focus on her assigned section, refilling water glasses and clearing plates with mechanical precision, but her eyes were drawn repeatedly to the isolated figure who sat surrounded by conversations he couldn't fully join. David Harrison had given up attempting to engage with the servers, instead dedicating himself to a comprehensive study of the restaurant's service patterns, staff interactions, and customer treatment protocols. His pen moved steadily across the pages, documenting everything from response times to the subtle hierarchies that determined who received attention and who was quietly ignored. The breaking point came when Mrs. Whitfield, a prominent socialite who lunched at the restaurant 3 times a week, noticed the unusual customer in the VIP section and voiced her concerns to Rachel in a stage whisper designed to be overheard. "I simply don't understand why someone dressed so inappropriately is dining in our section," she said, her pearls catching the light as she gestured dismissively toward David's table. "It rather ruins the atmosphere we come here to enjoy, don't you think?" Her companion nodded sagely, both women secure in the knowledge that their complaints would be taken seriously and acted upon immediately. Rachel's opportunity had arrived gift-wrapped in social pressure and customer dissatisfaction. She straightened her shoulders and walked purposefully toward the VIP section, her heels clicking against the marble floor with military precision. The sound cut through the ambient conversation like a countdown timer, drawing attention from nearby tables as diners sensed the approaching confrontation. Maya watched in horror from across the room, recognizing the predatory gleam in Rachel's eyes as the manager prepared to assert her authority in the most public way possible. "Maya, please come here," Rachel called across the dining room, her voice carrying the unmistakable tone of a summons rather than a request. The conversations at nearby tables died completely as every eye turned toward the young black server who had been singled out for public attention. Maya's hands trembled as she approached, her white uniform suddenly feeling like a target painted on her back, marking her as the designated scapegoat for whatever lesson Rachel intended to deliver to the assembled audience. Standing between Rachel and David's table, Maya felt the weight of every gaze in the VIP section, the oppressive attention of customers who saw her not as a person, but as a disruption to their carefully curated dining experience. Rachel's smile was sharp as a blade as she began her performance, each word chosen for maximum humiliation disguised as professional concern. "Maya has been somewhat overeager in her attempts to serve you this evening, and I want to personally apologize for any confusion this may have caused. She's still learning our standards for VIP service, and I'm afraid her enthusiasm sometimes overrides proper protocol." The words hit Maya like physical blows, each phrase designed to diminish her competence while providing Rachel with plausible deniability. Around them, the VIP customers nodded approvingly at management's swift response to the situation, their satisfaction evident in the way conversations resumed with renewed energy. "I apologize if I overstepped any boundaries," Maya said quietly, her voice barely audible above the renewed chatter of nearby diners. "I was only trying to help when I noticed that the customer was using sign language and seemed to be having difficulty communicating with the other servers." Her explanation sounded weak even to her own ears, the reasonable motivation behind her actions somehow diminished by Rachel's skillful reframing of the situation as insubordination rather than compassion. The familiar burn of shame rose in her chest, the same sensation she had experienced countless times when watching authority figures dismiss her sister's needs based on assumptions rather than evidence. Rachel's expression softened into mock sympathy, the kind of patronizing concern that adults often showed to children who had misbehaved with good intentions. "I appreciate your desire to help, Maya, but our VIP customers expect a certain level of sophistication in their service experience. What you saw as assistance might have been perceived as presumptuous or intrusive. We simply can't have servers making independent decisions about customer needs without consulting management first." The message was clear to everyone listening. Maya had acted above her station, presumed to understand customer needs better than her superiors, and required public correction to prevent future incidents. David Harrison sat in silence throughout the exchange, his hands clenched beneath the table as he fought to control the rage building in his chest. He could read every micro-expression on both women's faces, understood the power dynamic being played out for the entertainment of his fellow diners, recognized the casual cruelty disguised as professional standards. Maya's genuine desire to help had been twisted into evidence of incompetence, her bilingual abilities dismissed as irrelevant to the restaurant's image concerns. The injustice burned in his throat like acid, but he remained motionless, allowing the scene to play out, while his notebook filled with observations that would soon become weapons in a very different kind of confrontation. His pen moved across the page with quiet determination, documenting not just service failures, but human failures, cataloging the moments when dignity was sacrificed on the altar of artificial exclusivity. The humiliation settled over the VIP section like a thick fog, muffling conversations and creating an uncomfortable tension that even the most oblivious diners could sense. Maya stood frozen beside table 12, her head bowed in apparent submission, while her eyes burned with suppressed fury and embarrassment. Rachel basked in the moment of absolute control, her authority publicly demonstrated and reinforced through the ritualistic degradation of a subordinate who had dared to challenge the established order. The other servers watched from their stations with a mixture of sympathy and relief, grateful that they were not the ones standing in Maya's position, while simultaneously understanding that any of them could be next if they stepped out of line. David Harrison observed the aftermath of Rachel's performance with the cold calculation of someone who had spent decades navigating corporate power structures and recognizing the difference between leadership and bullying. His notebook lay open beside his untouched dessert, pages filled with detailed observations about service patterns, staff interactions, and the subtle but unmistakable hierarchy that governed every aspect of the restaurant's operations. What he had witnessed went far beyond poor customer service. It was a systematic devaluation of human dignity disguised as professional standards, a casual cruelty that infected the entire establishment like a virus. The weight of the silence became unbearable as nearby diners returned to their conversations with forced normalcy, the entertainment value of Maya's public correction already fading into background gossip. Rachel prepared to dismiss her wayward employee back to the regular dining section, confident that the lesson had been delivered effectively and witnessed by enough people to ensure its message would spread throughout the staff. Maya lifted her head slightly, her dark eyes meeting David's gaze for just a moment, and in that brief connection, he saw something that reminded him of his younger self. The quiet strength of someone who refused to be broken despite overwhelming circumstances. David reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a pen. Then he pulled a clean napkin from the table setting. His movements were deliberate and measured, designed to draw attention without creating alarm. The act of writing seemed almost ceremonial in the hushed atmosphere of the VIP section, each stroke of the pen carrying weight and significance that the observers couldn't yet comprehend. When he finished, he folded the napkin carefully and held it up toward Rachel, his expression neutral, but his eyes carrying an intensity that made several nearby diners pause their conversations to watch. "Excuse me," David said, his voice carrying clearly across the section despite its measured tone. "I'd like to speak with the owner of this restaurant." The simple statement cut through the ambient noise like a knife, drawing surprised glances from customers who rarely heard direct challenges to management authority in such refined settings. Rachel's confident smile faltered slightly, her mental calculations shifting as she tried to assess this unexpected development and determine the appropriate response to maintain her position of control. Rachel's recovery was swift and professional, her smile brightening as she prepared to handle what she assumed was a complaint that could be resolved through the application of charm and complimentary offerings. "I'm the general manager, sir, and I have full authority to address any concerns you might have about your dining experience this evening. I assure you that whatever issues you've encountered, we can resolve them quickly and to your complete satisfaction." Her voice carried the practiced confidence of someone who had successfully managed difficult customers for years, transforming complaints into opportunities to demonstrate superior service. David unfolded the napkin and showed her what he had written in clear block letters. "Please contact CEO David Harrison immediately. I need to speak with him about the service standards at this location." And the words seemed to hang in the air between them, their implications slowly registering in Rachel's mind as she processed the unusual request. Her eyebrows drew together in confusion, her professional composure wavering as she tried to understand why a customer would make such a specific demand, rather than simply expressing dissatisfaction through normal channels. "Mr. Harrison is not available for customer meetings," Rachel replied with a patronizing laugh that carried just a hint of nervousness. "He's an extremely busy executive who oversees hundreds of locations across the country. I'm sure you understand. that someone of his stature simply cannot be bothered with individual dining concerns, no matter how legitimate they might be. Her response was designed to put David in his place while simultaneously protecting her own authority. But something in his steady gaze made her feel less certain about her assessment of the situation. The moment stretched between them like a taut wire, the entire VIP section holding its breath as they waited to see how this unusual confrontation would resolve. Maya stood forgotten beside the table, her presence rendered invisible by the drama unfolding between customer and management. But her attention was focused entirely on David's face as she tried to understand what was happening. There was something different about his demeanor now, a subtle shift from passive observation to active engagement that suggested capabilities beyond those of an ordinary diner seeking resolution to service complaints. David reached into his wallet with movements that seemed to occur in slow motion. Each gesture weighted with significance that the observers couldn't yet comprehend. His fingers found the small leather folder where he kept his business cards, items that he rarely used in social settings, but always carried as symbols of the responsibility he bore for thousands of employees and millions of customers. The card he withdrew was simple and elegant, bearing only his name, title, and contact information printed on cream-colored stock that spoke of understated authority rather than flashy display. He placed the business card on the table between himself and Rachel, positioning it so that the text faced her directly. The simple rectangle of paper seemed to glow under the restaurant's carefully designed lighting, its presence transforming the entire dynamic of their interaction in ways that rippled outward through the assembled diners like shock waves from an earthquake. Rachel's eyes focused on the card with the intensity of someone trying to solve a complex puzzle, her mind struggling to process information that contradicted everything she thought she knew about the situation. David Harrison, Chief Executive Officer, Harrison Restaurant Group, she read aloud, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more clearly than her previous confident pronouncements. The color drained from her face as the implications crashed over her like a tsunami, washing away years of carefully constructed authority and leaving behind only the raw terror of someone who had just realized the magnitude of their mistake. Around them, the VIP section erupted in surprised murmurs as nearby diners processed the revelation that they had just witnessed a restaurant manager publicly humiliate an employee in front of the company's owner. Maya's eyes widened as she understood what had just happened, the pieces of David's unusual behavior throughout the evening suddenly clicking into place with perfect clarity. The business card lay between them like a live grenade, its simple elegance more devastating than any explosive could have been in that moment of absolute revelation. Rachel's hands trembled as she picked up the cream-colored rectangle, her perfectly manicured fingers betraying the terror that had replaced her earlier confidence. The text seemed to blur before her eyes as her mind struggled to process the impossible reality that the man she had dismissed and insulted was the very person who controlled her career, her livelihood, and the fate of everyone in the restaurant. Her face had gone ashen beneath her carefully applied makeup, the color draining away like water from a broken dam. The VIP section had fallen into complete silence, the soft jazz music echoing with unusual clarity as each note highlighted the magnitude of the moment unfolding before the assembled diners. Conversations at nearby tables had died as patrons leaned forward in their chairs, sensing that they were witnessing something unprecedented in the carefully orchestrated world of fine dining. Maya stood motionless beside the table, her earlier humiliation forgotten in the face of this stunning reversal of power, her dark eyes wide with disbelief as she watched Rachel's world collapse in real time. David Harrison rose slowly from his chair, the simple motion carrying more authority than any theatrical gesture could have conveyed. His gray hoodie, which had seemed so out of place among the designer clothing and expensive jewelry of the VIP clientele, now appeared to be exactly what it was, the casual attire of a man confident enough in his position to dress for comfort rather than impression. He reached across the table and gently took the business card from Rachel's nerveless fingers, returning it to his wallet with the care of someone handling a precious artifact. "Thank you for that demonstration, Rachel," David said, his voice carrying across the silent section with crystalline clarity. "I've learned more about this restaurant's true culture in the past 2 hours than I could have from a dozen management reports." His tone was conversational, almost friendly, but there was steel underneath that made several nearby diners shift uncomfortably in their seats. Rachel opened her mouth to speak, but no sound emerged, her vocal cords apparently paralyzed by the magnitude of her situation. David turned toward Maya, his expression softening as he lifted his hands and began to sign with fluid precision. "Thank you for your kindness tonight. You showed me more hospitality in 5 minutes than I received from anyone else on your staff." The signs flowed like poetry, each gesture carrying warmth and genuine appreciation that stood in stark contrast to the cold professionalism that had surrounded him all evening. Maya's eyes filled with tears as she watched his hands move, understanding not just his words, but the profound respect they conveyed. The sight of their CEO communicating in sign language sent ripples of amazement through the VIP section, as diners realized that Maya's dismissed skill was not only valuable, but essential for serving customers like David Harrison. Rachel's face went from ashen to green as she understood that her cultural biases had led her to publicly humiliate an employee in front of the very person who valued diversity and genuine customer service above artificial standards of presentation and exclusivity. "I came here tonight to understand how our flagship location operates when management believes no one is watching," David said, his voice carrying to every corner of the VIP section. "What I discovered was a systematic culture of discrimination disguised as standards, where customers are judged by their appearance and employees are punished for showing basic human compassion." Each word landed like a physical blow, stripping away the veneer of sophistication that Rachel had worked so hard to maintain. "Mr. Harrison, I can explain," Rachel finally managed to whisper, but David raised his hand to silence her, the simple gesture carrying more authority than shouting could have achieved. "You can explain why you dismissed a deaf customer's needs as inconvenient? You can explain why you punished an employee for possessing exactly the skills needed to serve that customer with dignity?" His questions hung in the air like accusations at a trial, each one highlighting a different aspect of Rachel's failures as both a manager and a human being. The transformation in the VIP section was palpable as other diners began to reassess everything they had witnessed, their earlier amusement at Maya's correction now replaced by embarrassment at their own complicity. "Effective immediately, you are terminated," David said, his voice cutting through the silence with surgical precision. "Security will escort you from the premises, and you will receive information about your final paycheck through human resources. Your actions tonight violated not only company policy, but basic human decency, and there are no circumstances under which I would allow you to continue representing our brand." The finality of his words echoed through the section like a gavel falling, bringing justice swift and absolute. Rachel's legs seemed to give out beneath her as the full impact crashed over her like a tsunami. Years of climbing the corporate ladder, building her reputation, and accumulating authority had been wiped away in a single moment of exposed prejudice and cruelty. She looked around the VIP section with desperate eyes, seeking some escape from the nightmare her life had become, but found only the judgmental stares of customers who now saw her as the villain in a story they had helped create. David turned back to Maya, his expression warming as he addressed the young woman who had shown courage in the face of institutional pressure. "Maya, your actions tonight demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership and compassion that we need more of in our organization. Your willingness to help a customer despite management pressure shows character that cannot be taught or faked. His words carried across the section, ensuring that everyone present understood that Maya was being honored rather than disciplined. The assembled diners watched in stunned silence as justice was served not through legal proceedings or formal complaints, but through the simple exposure of truth to power. The evening had begun with Maya standing humiliated before a crowd of strangers, dismissed and degraded for showing basic human kindness. It was ending with her being praised by the most powerful person in the company, while her tormentor faced the consequences of choices that had seemed so safe and righteous just moments before. The ripple effects of Rachel's termination spread through the restaurant like wildfire, whispered conversations carrying the incredible story from server to server, from kitchen to host stand, until every employee understood that their world had fundamentally changed in the span of a single evening. Maya found herself at the center of a transformation she never could have imagined, her quiet act of compassion becoming the catalyst for a corporate revolution that would reshape the entire Harrison restaurant group. The other servers looked at her with a mixture of awe and gratitude, understanding that her courage had exposed a toxic culture that had poisoned their workplace for years. Within hours of Rachel's departure, videos of the confrontation began appearing online, recorded by diners who had witnessed the extraordinary scene and recognized its significance. The footage showed Maya standing with quiet dignity as David Harrison praised her in sign language, the CEO's fluid gestures, creating a powerful visual narrative about inclusion, respect, and the true meaning of hospitality. The clips went viral with unprecedented speed, accumulating millions of views as people around the world shared their admiration for Maya's courage and David's decisive response to discrimination. David spent the remainder of the evening conducting impromptu interviews with staff members, listening to stories that revealed the depth of Rachel's toxic management style and its impact on employee morale, customer service, and the restaurant's fundamental culture. Server after server described incidents of favoritism, discrimination, and punishment for showing basic human kindness to customers who didn't meet arbitrary standards of appearance or behavior. The pattern was clear and damning. Rachel had created a system that prioritized exclusion over inclusion, appearance over character, and profit over human dignity. The corporate response was swift and comprehensive, reflecting David's understanding that systemic problems required systemic solutions rather than individual punishments. Within 48 hours, Harrison Restaurant Group announced a company-wide initiative to train all employees in basic American Sign Language, making their establishments more accessible to deaf and hard-of-hearing customers. The program would be mandatory for all customer-facing staff, with Maya leading the training development as the newly appointed Director of Accessibility and Inclusion, a position created specifically to recognize her expertise and commitment to serving all customers with dignity. The promotion transformed Maya's life overnight, elevating her from a server fighting for basic respect to a corporate executive with the authority to implement meaningful change across hundreds of locations. Her first initiative was to establish clear policies protecting employees who showed initiative in helping customers with disabilities, ensuring that compassion would be rewarded rather than punished. She worked directly with David to create training materials that went beyond basic sign language to address broader issues of accessibility, inclusion, and the fundamental respect that every customer deserved regardless of their appearance, communication method, or economic status. The media coverage grew exponentially as news outlets picked up the story, framing it as a powerful example of corporate accountability and the importance of standing up for marginalized communities. Maya found herself featured on magazine covers and television programs, her story inspiring countless others to speak up against discrimination in their own workplaces. But the attention that meant the most to her came from the deaf and hard-of-hearing community, who flooded social media with messages of gratitude for her willingness to bridge the communication gap and advocate for their needs in spaces where they had often felt unwelcome. The business impact was immediate and overwhelmingly positive, with Harrison Restaurant Group experiencing a surge in customers who specifically sought out establishments known for their inclusive practices and accessibility accommodations. Reservations increased on 30% across all locations as people voted with their wallets to support a company that had demonstrated a genuine commitment to serving all customers with dignity and respect. The financial success validated David's belief that doing the right thing was also good for business, creating a sustainable model for other companies to follow. 3 months after that transformative evening, Maya stood before a conference room filled with restaurant managers from across the country, leading a training session on disability awareness and inclusive customer service. Her presentation combined practical skills, like basic sign language, with deeper discussions about unconscious bias, systemic discrimination, and the moral imperative to create welcoming spaces for all customers. The managers listened with rapt attention, understanding that this was not just another corporate initiative, but a fundamental shift in how they would conduct business going forward. The Harrison Restaurant Group's headquarters displayed a new mission statement prominently in the lobby, words that reflected the lessons learned from Maya's courage and David's decisive leadership. We believe that true hospitality means welcoming every guest with dignity, respect, and the services they need to enjoy our establishments fully. Our commitment to accessibility and inclusion is not just policy. It is the foundation of who we are as a company and as human beings. The statement served as a daily reminder that the changes implemented were permanent, sustainable, and essential to the company's identity. Maya's office overlooked the same dining room where she had once served tables, a daily reminder of how far she had traveled and how much work remained to be done. On her desk sat a framed photograph from that pivotal evening, David Harrison signing, "Thank you," while she smiled with tears in her eyes. The image capturing the moment when compassion triumphed over cruelty and justice was served through the simple act of recognizing human dignity. The picture reminded her every day that individual courage could indeed change entire systems when combined with leadership willing to listen and act decisively. The transformation continued to spread beyond Harrison Restaurant Group as other companies began implementing similar accessibility initiatives, recognizing that the business case for inclusion was as compelling as the moral imperative. Maya became a sought-after consultant and speaker, helping organizations across various industries understand that serving customers with disabilities was not just the right thing to do, but also a tremendous business opportunity that had been overlooked for far too long. Her influence extended far beyond restaurants, touching healthcare systems, retail establishments, and educational institutions that sought to create more inclusive environments for all people. 6 months had transformed the flagship Harrison restaurant into something entirely different from the establishment where Maya had once served tables under Rachel's oppressive management. The dining room buzzed with new energy, where conversations flowed in multiple languages and communication methods, where servers moved between tables with genuine warmth rather than calculated professionalism. The walls displayed certificates recognizing the restaurant as a leader in accessibility and inclusion, and photographs of staff members proudly demonstrating their newly acquired sign language skills. Maya walked through the dining room in her role as Director of Accessibility and Inclusion, observing the evening service with the practiced eye of someone who understood both operations and the deeper cultural dynamics that determined whether customers felt valued or merely tolerated. She watched as servers naturally incorporated basic sign language into their interactions with all customers, creating an atmosphere of universal communication that enhanced everyone's dining experience. The changes went beyond accommodation to true transformation, reshaping the fundamental character of how hospitality was delivered. The staff reflected the diversity of the community they served, with employees hired for their skills, compassion, and commitment to inclusive service rather than their ability to project a certain image. Among them was James, a deaf server, who had been hired as part of the accessibility initiative and had quickly become one of the most popular team members. His presence sent a powerful message that Harrison Restaurant Group valued diverse abilities and recognized that different perspectives enriched rather than diminished the dining experience. David Harrison chose this evening to make an unannounced visit, entering wearing the same gray hoodie that had marked him as an outsider 6 months earlier. Now he was greeted immediately by the host, who recognized him and welcomed him in sign language before speaking aloud. The simple gesture demonstrated how completely the culture had shifted from exclusion to radical inclusion. Maya spotted David and approached his table with a warm smile, her confidence reflecting the personal transformation that had accompanied her professional advancement. She had grown from a server afraid to challenge unjust policies into a corporate executive with authority to implement systemic change, but her fundamental compassion remained unchanged. Her hands moved in fluid sign language as she greeted him, a conversation that drew appreciative glances from nearby diners who recognized the beauty of communication that transcended traditional boundaries. The reservation system shows we're booked solid for the next 3 months, Maya signed, and spoke simultaneously. Word of mouth has been incredible since we implemented the accessibility initiatives. People are driving hours just to experience dining at a restaurant where everyone feels genuinely welcome. Her pride was evident in the quiet satisfaction of someone who had helped create something meaningful and lasting. David's response came in sign language first, then spoken words, his fluency having improved dramatically through the company-wide training program. I never imagined that one evening could create such profound change, but I should have understood that courage is contagious. Your willingness to help a stranger, despite personal risk, inspired an entire organization to examine our values and make them real rather than just aspirational. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a family with a young daughter who was deaf, the parents clearly nervous about navigating a fine dining experience with a child who had often been made to feel unwelcome in upscale establishments. James immediately approached their table, signing a warm greeting to the little girl whose face lit up with joy at finding someone who could communicate with her in her native language. The parents watched in amazement as their daughter engaged confidently with the server, asking questions about the menu with the ease of a child who felt completely accepted. Maya watched the interaction with deep satisfaction, understanding that this scene represented the true measure of their success, not the media attention or corporate recognition, but the moment when a child realized that she belonged in spaces that had previously excluded her. The little girl's laughter rang through the dining room as James performed a playful magic trick with his napkin, creating joy that was infectious and pure. Other customers turned to watch with smiles, drawn into the happiness that radiated from authentic human connection across communication barriers. The evening continued with dozens of similar moments, each one demonstrating that accessibility and inclusion enhanced rather than diminished the dining experience for everyone involved. Customers who had never encountered sign language before found themselves fascinated by the visual poetry of the server's movements, and elderly diners shared stories of family members who had faced similar communication challenges. The restaurant had become more than a place to eat. It had evolved into a community space where differences were celebrated rather than merely tolerated. As the evening wound down, David and Maya stood together near the window overlooking the city, reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The view encompassed not just the physical landscape, but the social transformation that had rippled outward from their restaurant to influence countless other businesses and organizations. Maya's courage had sparked a movement that continued to grow, inspiring similar initiatives across industries and communities. 6 months ago, I thought I was just trying to help one customer place an order, Maya said, her voice soft with wonder at the magnitude of what had emerged from that simple act of kindness. I never imagined it would lead to all this. The policy changes, the training programs, the new positions created for people with disabilities. It's overwhelming to think about the impact of just treating someone with basic human dignity. David's response came with the wisdom of someone who had learned that true leadership meant creating conditions where others could flourish. Kindness isn't weakness, Maya. It's the strongest force in human experience because it recognizes the fundamental dignity that connects all of us. What you did that evening wasn't just good customer service. It was moral leadership that called all of us to be better than we were. The final customers departed into the night, carrying with them not just satisfied appetites, but renewed faith in the possibility of creating inclusive spaces where everyone belonged. Outside, the city lights sparkled like stars, each one representing another opportunity for human connection across the differences that too often divide rather than enrich our common experience. In that moment, Maya understood that quiet strength had always been her greatest power. Not the ability to demand attention, but the courage to extend dignity when others chose to withhold it.